Turin should have reported the gesture immediately. Protocol was explicit on that point. Any unexplained synchronization during a first-rank diplomatic ceremony, especially one coinciding with an orbital anomaly, belonged in the security channel before the next breath. Instead, he stood beneath the crystal dome with his tablet dark in his hand and watched the ceremony continue as if reality had not just shifted by a fraction no one else seemed willing to acknowledge. That alone would have troubled him. What unsettled him more was the human delegation. They had not flinched when the sanctuary lights dimmed. They had not looked confused when the eastern glass shivered with that almost invisible wave. They had reacted the way trained personnel react to confirmation. The formal welcome moved on with polished grace. Humanity was granted provisional corridor access, cultural exchange recognition, and a speaking seat in the Outer Coalition Council pending defense review in 3 cycles. It was generous enough to feel historic. Ambassador Ilara Thorne accepted it with perfect restraint, her voice calm, warm, impossibly measured. She thanked the assembly, spoke of trust, distance, and the old mistake civilizations made when they met each other through weapons before language, and the hall rewarded her with approving silence before the applause rose. It should have felt like relief. Instead, Turin watched the humans exchange brief glances so subtle they would have passed for nothing to anyone not trained to measure tension in shoulders and hands. Not relief. Not triumph. Recognition. By custom, the delegates drifted afterward into the inner observatory, where silver storms crawled across the dead world below and diplomacy shed its ceremonial skin. Turin preferred receptions to speeches. Public sessions displayed intention. Receptions exposed anatomy. He found himself near one of the human attaches, Jonah Mercer, a cultural liaison whose file made him look harmless in the precise way a polished file often did. Mercer was charming without effort, passing around a paper notebook as if it were an amusing antique, drawing laughter from delegates who had spent the ceremony behind layers of caution. He noticed Turin before Turin spoke. "You look like a man who has never trusted a coincidence in his life," Mercer said, offering him a cup from a passing tray. "That is because coincidences are often lazy names for patterns," Turin replied. Mercer smiled, and for a moment the warmth on his face remained while something colder settled behind it. Then the observatory glass trembled again. This time Turin saw Mercer's eyes shift, not to the stars ahead, but to the reflection behind them, checking the room with the reflex of someone waiting for a signal. "What are you expecting?" Turin asked. Mercer set his cup against the rail with care. "That depends," he said softly, "on whether your people noticed the same thing ours did." Before Turin could answer, every light in the observatory dropped to black, and far beyond the sanctuary glass, something enormous moved where the stars had been. The blackout lasted less than 2 seconds, but in diplomacy, 2 seconds was enough time for a civilization to reveal itself. When the power returned, the observatory did not erupt into chaos. That was what Turin noticed first. The non-human delegates reacted in familiar patterns, alarm masked as indignation, rapid calls for status, instinctive clustering by rank and species. The humans did something else. They spread. Not dramatically, not like soldiers drawing lines in open conflict, but with quiet precision that turned a reception floor into a map of overlapping sightlines. One moved toward the primary exit without seeming to hurry. Another placed herself beside the Keeler archivist she had been speaking with moments before. Ambassador Thorne remained exactly where she was, one hand resting on the rail, gaze lifted toward the dark outside as if she had just seen a difficult truth arrive on schedule. Then the stars moved again. At first Turin thought the sanctuary glass was distorting. The black beyond it seemed to ripple in a shape too large for easy comprehension, as though emptiness itself had shifted its weight. Across the observatory, someone whispered a prayer in a trade language old enough to predate coalition law. The silver storms over the dead world below continued their silent crawl, but above them hung a wound in the sky, vast and colorless, visible only because it hid the stars behind it. It held there for one impossible heartbeat and then vanished, or rather withdrew so smoothly that its absence felt more alarming than its appearance. The emergency chimes sounded a second later. Polite. Controlled. Designed to prevent panic. Turin almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Shield refractive failure in the eastern aperture, announced the sanctuary's central intelligence in a voice so calm it became offensive. Guests are advised to remain within designated social sectors while diagnostics proceed. Mercer gave the ceiling a look that might have been amusement. That is an optimistic interpretation. Trinh turned to him. You knew. Mercer did not deny it. We suspected. That object was already in position. Yes. How long? Mercer finally looked at him fully, and the easy social warmth from earlier had narrowed into something far more disciplined. Long enough to matter. Around them, coalition security entered the observatory in polished formation, weapons holstered but visible, all serenity and suppression. That performance might have worked on lesser guests. It did nothing for Trinh now. He could see the minute lag in their movements, the fractional overload in their comm traffic, the widening circles of uncertainty beneath command posture. Whatever had crossed the shield perimeter had not been expected by sanctuary control, which meant either the humans had noticed something coalition security had missed, or they had known to look in the first place. He was not sure which possibility disturbed him more. The delegates were ushered in careful streams away from the observatory and toward the inner reception chambers. No one used the word lockdown. No one needed to. Trinh stayed near the human group through instinct rather than decision, and no one stopped him, least of all Thorn. She moved through the shifting crowd with a composure that seemed almost indecent under the circumstances, thanking alarmed hosts, guiding slower delegates forward, pausing once to steady an elderly Lauren jurist whose balancing fringe had flared in distress. It was a masterful piece of public behavior. She gave everyone something to mirror. That alone prevented the first ugly fracture. Only when the doors sealed behind the last cluster of guests did her expression change. Not much. A thinning around the eyes. A subtraction of ceremony. Trinh, she said, as if they had been in the middle of a conversation rather than the mouth of a crisis. Walk with us. It was not phrased as a request. He went. The chamber they entered was one of the sanctuary's private consultation suites, circular and understated, lined with translucent mineral walls that turned the light within them soft and depthless. Security remained outside. Inside stood only the human delegation, Trinh, and a silence so deliberate it made his skin tighten. For the first time since the summit began, no one pretended this was diplomacy as usual. Jonah Mercer closed the inner door manually, an act so archaic it felt theatrical until Trinh realized why. Manual systems did not listen. Ambassador Thorn turned to face him. Before you decide whether to be offended, she said, know that we were trying to avoid exactly this outcome. Trinh let the anger come because it was cleaner than uncertainty. You came to a coalition sanctuary under the protection of first contact law while concealing the approach of an unidentified vessel inside our orbital envelope. Not vessel, said a quiet voice from the far side of the room. Trinh looked up. He had scarcely noticed the woman before, though that in itself now struck him as impossible. She was one of the human technical advisors, slight, dark-haired, forgettable in the way some dangerous minds learned to appear. She touched the side of a projection slate on the table and a mesh of distorted readings unfolded in the air between them. Not one vessel, she repeated. A lattice. The image rotated. At first it looked like noise, then curvature, then pattern. Trinh stepped closer despite himself. Multiple mass signatures. Widely spaced. Not advancing in conventional formation but distributed across angles that made the sanctuary's sensor net interpret them as shielding echo and gravitational clutter. A blind geometry. Clever enough that even now he would have dismissed half the returns as artifacts if he had seen them individually. Stealth architecture, he said. Not ours, Mercer answered. That landed harder than Trinh expected. Until that moment part of him had been waiting for the elegant betrayal, the revelation that humanity had arrived smiling while their fleet crouched beyond the dark. It would have been almost comforting. Familiar treachery fit known models. This did not. Then whose? He asked. The humans exchanged one of those brief, infuriating glances that carried whole paragraphs in silence. We don't know with certainty, Thorn said. But we know why they're here. Because of you. Yes. The word did not shake. No shame. No defensiveness. Only acceptance of fact. Turin felt the room narrow around that truth. The technical advisor adjusted the projection again, and the distorted lattice dissolved into another sequence: communications fragments, timestamp overlays, old transit records stitched together from damaged archives. Turin recognized none of the source markers. Human intelligence work, then, or something close to it. A phrase surfaced 3 times in the recovered signal band, each instance incomplete, each one older than the last. Corridor species. Deferred integration. Asset reacquisition. Asset. The word entered the room like poison. You are not talking about opportunistic aggression, Turin said slowly. You are talking about pursuit. No one answered at once, which was answer enough. Outside the consultation suite, the sanctuary's emergency tones shifted pitch. Lower now. More frequent. A control pattern entering stress. Thorne folded her hands behind her back. Before first contact with the coalition, humanity encountered an external actor operating beyond mapped trade space. Indirectly at first. Missing probes. Corrupted relay buoys. Quiet interventions around our long-range routes that stopped short of open hostility. We believed it was surveillance until a civilian convoy disappeared intact. Turin stared at her. Intact. Crew gone. Ships powered down. Cargo untouched. Navigation logs erased with techniques we did not recognize. For the first time, something moved in her voice that was not diplomatic design. Not fear exactly. Memory, perhaps. 3 months later, one of the ships came back. He did not ask in what condition. Something in her face warned him away from details he was not ready to carry. We altered our diplomatic timetable after that, Mercer said. Accelerated outreach. Increased transparency. Pushed for coalition contact before we were ready by our own standards. Turin thought of the immaculate files in the archive, the almost reckless openness, the disciplined patience that had seemed too polished to be innocent. Not innocence, then. Urgency shaped into grace. Humanity had not been eager because they were naive. They had been building an alliance under pursuit. And you told no one, he said. We told no one until we had proof that wouldn't get filed as species panic or admission theater, Thorne said. If we arrived at your threshold saying something unseen was hunting our periphery, every fear your council holds about emerging powers would have activated at once. We would have been quarantined, studied, delayed, perhaps quietly denied. We needed entry before the shadow chose to introduce itself for us. The logic was merciless. Worse, it was plausible. Turin turned back to the lattice of hidden masses. So tonight was the demonstration. No, said the quiet advisor. Tonight was the interception point. That phrase took a moment to settle. When it did, the room seemed to lose temperature. Mercer moved to the mineral wall and listened, not to sound exactly but to the rhythm beneath it, as if he were measuring the sanctuary through his bones. They didn't come just to watch the vote, he said. They came because the vote changed something. What? No one answered quickly enough. Then the entire suite jolted under their feet, not violently, but with the unmistakable force of a distant impact transmitted through impossible amounts of structure, and the sanctuary intelligence, still trying to sound calm, announced that all delegates were now under protective movement order. At the same instant, every light in the consultation room dimmed to emergency gold, and Turin realized with a clarity that hit like cold metal that whatever had been waiting beyond the stars was no longer hiding. The first true impact landed somewhere below the eastern transit ring. Turin knew that not from the sanctuary's announcement, which continued to frame the event as a systems disturbance, but from the way the floor flexed under load and the way Ambassador Thorne's attention sharpened at once toward a part of the station map no one else in the room could see. The hidden vessels had stopped pretending to be ghosts. Whatever game they had been playing in the dark was over. The consultation suite unlocked from the outside a heartbeat later. 2 coalition security officers entered, both armed now, both carrying the brittle composure of professionals who had been told too little too quickly. The senior officer, a Vare woman named Seelan whom Turin recognized from perimeter review, focused first on him, then on Thorne, then on the projection still hanging above the table. For a fraction of a second her discipline slipped. "Analyst Vale," she said, "you are required in central response immediately." Turin did not move. "On whose authority?" "Emergency command." "Whose emergency command?" That hesitation was enough. Seelan had expected compliance, not analysis. Behind Turin, Jonah Mercer touched the edge of the table once, a tiny sound to redirect attention. When Seelan's eyes flicked toward him, Thorne stepped into the gap with elegant, practiced calm. "Officer," she said, "before you remove anyone from this room, ask yourself a simple question. If Sanctuary Control still possesses operational clarity, why are you here in person rather than through the wall?" Seelan's jaw tightened. She knew the answer. Manual delivery meant compromised channels. Another tremor moved through the structure, stronger this time, followed by a distant metallic groan that did not belong anywhere inside a stable orbital sanctuary. Somewhere, something vast was applying force to architecture designed to endure war. The younger officer touched his comm and flinched at whatever burst came through. "Transit Spine 4 is gone," he said before he could stop himself. Seelan shot him a warning glance, but the damage was done. Gone, not breached. Turin felt the implications align with cold efficiency. The hidden lattice had not opened with indiscriminate bombardment. It had struck movement and control first. Pin the station. Fracture command. Reduce response to isolated decisions. A terrifyingly patient opening move. Mercer saw the same realization on his face. "They learn institutions before they break them," he said quietly. Seelan rounded on him. "You are going to explain exactly who they are." Thorne answered before he could. "If we had a name you could act on, we would have given it. What we have is pattern. They hunt developing networks at the moment they become difficult to isolate. Not before, not after. When a new power secures alliance but has not yet integrated defense." "Harvesters," said the quiet human advisor. Turin looked at her. "You have a term." "We have a placeholder," she replied. "Because not naming a threat makes people sloppy. They remove talent, archives, biological stock, industrial models, navigation frameworks. Entire systems remain physically intact afterward, but the things that let a civilization become more than local are simply gone." The younger officer stared. "That is not warfare." "No," Turin said, hearing the answer form as he spoke. "It is acquisition." The room went still around that word. It explained too much at once. Corridor species. Deferred integration. Asset reacquisition. The phrases in the human intercepts had not described diplomacy or conquest. They described sorting, cataloging, ownership. Seelan's calm chirped again, then burst into static. Her face hardened. Central response is fractured. Delegates are being moved toward interior shelters. There are reports of boarding attempts along 3 service axes, but sensor confirmation is collapsing. She looked at Turin. "If you know something that changes that equation, say it now." He almost answered from instinct, but stopped. Something had been wrong with the sequence from the start, and in crisis the temptation was always to fill gaps with movement rather than thought. He turned to the projection instead. The lattice still hovered above the table, but one cluster now pulsed brighter, nearer, its vectors tightened into a geometry he suddenly recognized. "They're not trying to seize the sanctuary wholesale," he said. "Not yet." Mercer nodded once. "Go on." "They appeared during the vote but did not strike. They waited through ceremony, through reception, through private movement. Their first impacts severed transit, not life support. If this were extermination, they're doing it inefficiently. If this were standard boarding, they'd hit command core first. Instead they're shaping traffic." The quiet advisor expanded the projection. Interior routes bloomed beneath the hidden masses. A new overlay appeared, one Turin knew the humans had prepared before the first impact. That fact would have angered him more if the data were not so devastatingly useful. A convergence point emerged inside the sanctuary. Not the command nexus. Not the diplomatic chambers. The archives. For one surreal instant Turin thought only of shelves, memory vaults, old treaties sealed in lightstone, behavioral maps, cultural genomes, first contact records, strategic doctrine, medical exchange banks. Then the larger implication struck. Orcs Prime was not just a summit site. It was a compression point for the Coalition's living continuity. Tonight, with humanity formally admitted into outer council structures, those archives also contained the first unified mapping between human expansion corridors and Coalition transit law. The Harvesters had not come to destroy a ceremony. They had come to take the future while it was gathered in one room. Seelan understood it from his face before he spoke. The archives? Yes. Tyans would complete the trap themselves. Then what do we do? Seelan demanded. The quiet advisor answered this time, and for the first time there was something like restrained fear in her voice. We deny them concentration. Fragment the value. Separate the assets before they can be classified in one sweep. Seelan looked ready to object again, but another impact silenced her. This one was close enough to send dust from the mineral seams. Beyond the wall came the unmistakable roar of people no longer fully under control. Thorn turned to Trin. How much authority can you still claim if Central Command is degraded? He understood the real question beneath it. Not what power did he possess, but what risk would he take ownership of? Enough, he said. Then use it. Move the Sanctuary's behavioral index, diplomatic chain vaults, and transit harmonics into distributed dead storage. Split the keys by species cluster and physical route, not network path. Force any raiding party to choose between time and certainty. Seelan stared at him. That will cripple our own response. For an hour, Trin said. Maybe 2. And after that? He looked at the hidden masses beyond the stars, at the convergence lines, at the archive nodes still pulsing like a wound. After that, he thought, we either remain ourselves or become inventory. Before he could answer, the wall display flared red. Not from the sanctuary systems. From the human slate Mercer had locked off manual channels to preserve. A private warning. Independent of Coalition control. Multiple biosignatures had appeared inside the archive ring. Not docking. Not breach teams moving through corridors. Appearing. The quiet advisor went pale. They've seeded inside. How? Seelan said. No one replied, because the answer arrived on its own with brutal elegance. The impossible stealth lattice. The delayed strike. The obsession with timing. They had never needed to force entry the way ordinary fleets did. They had ridden the Sanctuary's own ceremonial opening windows, its shield phase transitions, the harmless fluctuations everyone assumed were part of a diplomatic event. Mercer looked at Turin, and all of his social ease was gone now, stripped down to something harder and older. This is the part we couldn't prove before tonight, he said. They don't just study systems. They use trust as infrastructure. Then the Sanctuary lights failed completely, and somewhere in the dark beyond the consultation suite, the first scream was cut short so abruptly it sounded less like death than removal. Darkness changed the Sanctuary more completely than damage had. In the lit hours, Orcs Prime had always seemed too refined to break, all measured voices and translucent stone, its authority embedded in rituals so deeply that even alarm arrived with manners. In blackout, that illusion died at once. The air filled with raw sound, running feet, shouted names, the metallic bark of manual seals slamming shut somewhere down the corridor, the high thin edge of panic no protocol ever truly removed from living beings. Emergency gold failed to return. Whatever had entered the archive ring had not merely damaged the grid. It had taken hold of the systems that told the Sanctuary how to think about itself. Turn moved before the fear could harden. Manual routing, he said, already stripping the archive slate from its cradle. No central relay. No shared corridor maps. Officer Seelan, I need runners, not broadcasts. Physical key splits only. If anything asks for confirmation through the wall, assume compromise. Seelan did not argue now. Crisis had burned ambiguity out of her. She snapped orders to her junior officer, then to the 2 coalition guards outside, sending them into the dark with fragments of command that could not be intercepted because they were now carried in breath and memory. It was primitive. It was ugly. It was exactly right. Thorne and Mercer were already moving with the same recognition. The quiet human advisor fractured the projection into hard copy pulses, downloading route partitions and storage assignments into isolated slates that would never touch the sanctuary network again. Mercer opened the consultation suite's concealed maintenance access with a manual override tool so old Turin almost laughed at the irony. All the Coalition's glittering architecture, all its elegant dependence on seamless intelligence and survival had come down to metal, hands, and the refusal to trust convenience. Another scream carried through the corridor outside, this one longer, and then stopped with the same impossible suddenness. Not shot. Not torn away by explosives. Interrupted. Removed. Turin felt the pattern locking into place. The harvesters were not flooding the station with brute force because brute force damaged value. They were cutting out nodes, archives, specialists, continuity staff, anyone carrying cultural, strategic, or interpretive weight. Extermination was wasteful. Selection was cleaner. The thought almost froze him. Almost. Mercer caught it in his face. Do not give them your imagination, he said. Give them your worst assumption and keep moving. They split the sanctuary's future in minutes. Diplomatic chain vaults were redirected into species-coded dead storage. Transit harmonics were scattered across isolated cache chambers whose access logic now existed only in the heads of couriers moving through dark corridors under manual seal. Behavioral indices were stripped from the central archive and packed into optical wafers too small to matter to anyone who did not know what they held. It was sacrilege by administrative standards. Turin felt each act like a blade against everything the sanctuary represented. But every transfer reduced the value of a clean capture. Every fracture made the Coalition harder to catalog. Then the wall beside the suite rippled. Not with impact. With absence. A circular section of mineral simply lost cohesion and folded inward soundlessly, as if some hidden force had instructed matter to stop being joined to itself. The thing that came through was not large. That was the first horror of it. Turin had expected giants. Something equal in spectacle to the shadow that had moved across the stars. Instead, the intruder was slender, wrapped in a shifting field that bent the room around it, its outline refusing fixed interpretation. Limbs where limbs should not have been. No visible face. Only an oval plane that absorbed the emergency reflections and returned none of them. It carried no obvious weapon because its presence was already a tool designed for places built on certainty. Seelan fired first. Her pulse round struck the distortion around the figure and vanished into a flare of white static. The intruder did not fall. It tilted, almost curiously, and Turin understood with sick clarity that it was not surprised to be resisted. It was only confirming what kind of room it had entered. Mercer slammed the maintenance hatch open and shouted for everyone to move. Thorne did not hesitate. She seized two of the fragmented slates, thrust another into Turin's hands, and drove the quiet advisor toward the hatch while Seelan and her remaining guard fired again and again, not to kill, but to overload the field long enough to create motion. The rounds still vanished, but each impact thickened the air around the intruder with violent interference. That was enough. Turin dropped into the maintenance shaft second to last, hearing the consultation suite erupt behind him as the intruder crossed the threshold in a blur too fluid for muscle. The hatch sealed above them on Mercer's manual cut, plunging the shaft into stale darkness broken only by the red pulse of a service lamp deeper below. They descended on narrow rungs into the skeleton of the sanctuary, where beauty gave way to supports, coolant lines, and the intimate mechanical truth beneath ceremonial stone. The shaft emptied into a service junction barely high enough to stand in. Far below, through layers of structure, the sanctuary groaned again. Turin imagined the hidden lattice tightening its grip, unseen vessels holding station while their seated agents moved like scalpels through a place designed for peace. Humanity had not brought war to Orith Prime. War had followed humanity because something in the dark had decided alliance itself was intolerable. That thought changed shape as soon as it fully formed. Not just humanity, he realized. Not just Earth. The harvesters had waited until tonight because tonight was the first moment humanity ceased to be merely an emerging species and became connective tissue. The vote had not added one civilization to the coalition. It had created new corridors between histories, doctrines, industries, instincts, futures. The enemy hunted that moment because once enough systems learned each other honestly, acquisition became harder. Diversity stopped being administrative burden and became defense. The sanctuary shook with a violence that nearly threw them all sideways. This time the roar that followed was different. Not impact. Atmosphere venting somewhere it should not. The quiet advisor caught the wall and whispered something sharp in her own language. Mercer looked upward, listening again to the station through its bones. "They've reached the Eastern Archive Ring," he said. "No," Turin answered, surprising himself with the certainty in his own voice. "They've reached where the Eastern Archive Ring used to matter." He held up the isolated slate Thorn had given him. Around him, others carried the same impossible burden in fragments. The coalition's continuity was now dispersed through frightened hands moving in dark service veins. Untidy. Mortal. For the first time since the impacts began, hope entered the room not as comfort but as resistance. Thorn saw it too. "Then we make the rest of the station understand that," she said. "If they still think the archives are intact, they will keep dying to defend emptiness." Seelan stared at her. "All channels are compromised." "Not all," Mercer said. He was looking toward an old emergency transmission spine running parallel to the service junction, a relic line used only for external catastrophe beacons because it predated the sanctuary's elegant intelligence architecture. One way, low-band, ugly, and nearly impossible to spoof without already controlling the physical conduit. The kind of system advanced institutions kept only because history occasionally embarrassed progress. "It reaches the whole station?" Turin asked. "And orbit," Mercer said. Seelan understood at once. "If we use it, whatever is holding position outside hears us too." Turin looked at the dark around them, at the bruised faces, the fragmented slates, the human ambassador who had come to ask for trust while being hunted by something that weaponized trust better than anyone in the coalition had imagined. Survival would be easier if they stayed silent. Hide the fragments. Slip survivors deeper. Let the enemy keep wasting time on hollow vaults until a few could escape. It was the practical choice. It was also exactly how civilizations were reduced. Quietly, in pieces, each small survival purchased by surrendering the shared truth that made larger resistance possible. "If we stay silent," he said, "they define what happened here." No one answered because they did not need to. The decision settled among them with the weight of consequence rather than consensus. They moved to the emergency spine together. Mercer tore the casing free. The quiet advisor bridged the power manually. Seelan posted herself at the junction mouth with her rifle raised toward the dark. Thorn placed one hand on the transmission console, but when she turned, her eyes found Turin. "You saw it before we did," she said. "Not the ships. The pattern. Speak first." He had spent a career studying how truths entered institutions, how fear distorted them, how language could either stabilize a species or fracture it. Now all of that narrowed into one impossible moment. In a service junction beneath a broken sanctuary while something faceless hunted value through the dark. Turin keyed the emergency spine alive. Across Orith Prime, in shelters, corridors, sealed chambers, damaged rings, on drifting maintenance platforms and panicked command posts, the old system woke with a burst of raw static. Then his voice entered the sanctuary stripped of ceremony, carrying not reassurance but instruction. "The archives are gone," he said. "Not lost. You are not defending vaults anymore. You are defending each other. Break concentration. Kill every route map. Trust no wall, no channel, no confirmation you did not witness with living eyes. If you carry knowledge, divide it. If you carry authority, spend it. If you are waiting for central command, understand this now. The station survives only as fragments that refuse to become inventory." For one breath there was nothing. Then answers began to arrive, not through clean systems, but through action echoing back through the sanctuary itself. Manual seals slammed shut in new patterns. Relay ladders went dead one by one as local teams severed compromised channels. Lifeboat crews refused automated docking calls. Interior lights flared and vanished in deliberate sectors as engineers blinded route prediction. All across Orith Prime, people who had never met each other chose disorder over capture. Beyond the hull, somewhere in the black beyond the hidden lattice, the enemy was listening. And for the first time since the stars moved, Trin understood the deeper reason they had feared humanity enough to follow it here. Not because humans were stronger than older powers, or harsher, or less afraid. Because they had come carrying a habit the galaxy had never properly valued until this night. A willingness to turn trust into choice rather than dependency, to let ordinary people hold the line of civilization in their own two hands. Above them, the sanctuary still groaned, wounded and unfinished, the battle nowhere near over. But now the harvesters would have to fight for every fragment.